right. Hello there, and welcome to the Absolute Game of Nerds. This is a new podcast, an inaugural podcast for myself, JP and Rohan here. We are two non geeks, non nerds that like to collect comic books, and we like to talk about it. So, our hope for today's podcast is to give you basically a background of our collecting, what we've done, where we came from, the who, what, where, when, and why of our collecting. And then with future podcasts, talk more about specifics, maybe some spec, maybe some talk about books that we bought and our ideas on their long-term investability or PC versus flipping books, things of that nature. So with that, I'd like to say hi, I'm JP.
Hi, I'm Rohan.
And we're going to get right into it today. So we're going to have Rohan, since he was kind enough to do this from work. He's going to go ahead and go first here. He's at his gym, and he's going to go ahead and give you sort of the background of his investing, and then I'll go ahead and get into it and go from there.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it necessarily my investing, but my collecting. My name is Rohan. I am in here in Seattle. As JP said, I'm at my gym. I own a gym in downtown Seattle, kind of like a CrossFit style type gym. Husband, 3 kids, kind of the usual, just a regular guy. I grew up loving comics, like probably till about 10 years old, I would say. I grew up on the X-Men, Spider-Man, specifically their cartoons. That really got me into it. I started with cards, and I started collecting. And that died off till I was about 9 years old, I would say. But X-Men, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, the Hulk, Silver Surfer. Those were kind of my go-to favorites. What about you?
I would say what brought me into collecting was Spider-Man. So Spider-Man's always been my favorite, but Batman, Wolverine, those were the names. Again, back when we collected, was Avengers big? It wasn't for me.
No.
Now it is. So how things have changed, but it was X-Men, Wolverine, Spider-Man, anything Venom back in that time frame. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I should have mentioned, Batman, the Batman cartoon. Like, the cartoons is really probably what really got me into all of this, right? Is watching those cartoons and growing up on those cartoons. And the 3 were Batman, X-Men, and Spider-Man.
Yeah, I know the Batman, the New Adventures of Batman, they had a Superman show, and the X-Men Adventures, what was it called? The X-Men, I think it was the X-Men Adventures, right? 94, the song that just played in the most recent Multiverse of Madness.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it was on Saturday mornings. I always remember that. Did
Spider-Man have a show in that time frame?
Yeah, Spider-Man had a show that ran for several years. Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah.
I'm trying to remember that one, because I don't remember the Spider-Man show. I don't remember the Superman show, but I know I definitely have seen the New Adventure, the Batman, and the X-Men. I saw them all.
Yeah.
So those ones, but I don't remember the Spider-Man one. But
again, the good news is now you can watch these all on Disney Plus now if you want to catch up.
I mean, there's so much content now, and that's what we didn't have back then.
Yeah.
When I started collecting, I started with baseball cards. That's what got me into collecting. Baseball cards was the thing I did. I was a big baseball fan. I'm from Pittsburgh, loved the Pirates, so I was collecting baseball cards. And when I was on vacation, it was either on vacation at my grandmother's house. I think it was my grandmother's house. She would give me money, a couple bucks, and run down to 7-Eleven and go buy comic books. And the first book I bought, because it was such a cool cover, was, I don't know if you can see it, but Amazing Spider-Man 269 with Firelord on the cover and a black suit Spider-Man.
You still have? That's the original one?
That's the original one, because it's newsstand, right?
Yeah,
so that's
awesome.
The one I bought. And it got some spine ticks. It was read pretty well, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But that was one of the first books I bought, and I have a power pack on here. Power pack number 10. And the reason I bought it was because it had sharks on the cover, and I was into sharks too. So what neat things kids do in the day. But those are the first couple of books I bought, and I really didn't take hold until maybe a few years later, whenever a buddy of mine in I think it was in junior high, we like to draw on comic stuff, superheroes, and started to buy more comics just to get better ideas of how to draw certain things, certain poses. And that's where McFarlane got introduced to me, seeing how he did it, and Jim Lee and Liefeld, and wanted to collect those books. And one of the early books that I really had a love for, but never actually got a chance to buy, was The Punisher One, because that was such a great drawn cover. I think that was Mike Zeck, and just such a great cover. And I remember seeing that in the comic book store, and my mom didn't let me get that because it was too violent of a book. Because books weren't graded back then, so you could
Yeah.
read all of it, right? So I'd see them on the at the comic book on the wall at the comic book shop, and you can't buy that one, but I could buy the Wolverine Hulk 340 with Wolverine on the cover.
Totally,
I was okay to buy.
much more peaceful there.
Yeah, it was a better, less violent book. But either way, it got me into seeing those images and the covers, and then reading the books and getting the artwork from them. Catapulted me from McFarlane to Liefeld to Jim Lee, and then just wanted to accumulate all their books. As you can see from behind me, all my McFarlane's behind me, that I've been collecting since then. And it was a good time during that. And Rowan, if you would experience the '90s of the boom and bust of that time frame.
I mean, I'm a '90s kid. Well, I just did the comic books that we had that I always will never forget. And we would trade them. And I remember we always had these. It was the Jim Lee X-Men one, the Todd McFarlane Spider-Man one. And I remember we thought we were so cool because we found an X Factor one, which is from like 1986 or something like that. And so as '90s kids, whoa, this is an old book from the '80s. This is going to be worth a lot of money. I mean, it's still, you can get that dumb book for $15 even today.
Right.
We thought it was something, but it was the X-Men and the Spider-Man ones. Those two books, like I remember holding those, flipping through them, reading them, trading them back and forth between friends. But those two were the two most iconic and memorable books from those days. I'm kind of the reverse as you, though. Like, I was collecting comics and comic cards, and it tailed off as I got into baseball cards. So being in Seattle, I was a huge Ken Griffey Jr. fan, and then the Sonics of that era with Sean Kemp and Gary Payton. So we started collecting cards, and that I was like, oh, okay, I'm too old for comics now. I'm going into sports cards.
I went the other way, and it was kind of. I still was into collecting the baseball cards, but noticed towards the end of probably before I started college, which was '95, that going to shows, whether it be comic books or baseball cards, you just had this feeling that used to get 50 cents on a dollar to the dealers, then you got down to getting 25 cents on a dollar because that bust started to take place, and both started to tail off. I mean, both are super popular now. Maybe they'll tail off like they did, but it has come full circle again. But I remember that time frame that it just wasn't cool anymore to collect them. But again, you and I probably, the reason we got out, right? Our origins, again, how we got into it, but how we got out of it was either college started or something new took hold of your time. And I think if that comic bust wouldn't have happened, we probably still would have stuck with it.
Yeah, I mean, in all reality, like I didn't even know there was a bust until years later, right? Like when I was there, like I wasn't aware of it.
Yeah, I could tell because I would do a lot of not flipping, but I would speculate on, especially on the football cards with Heisman Trophy winners, trying to get that rookie card to have the next. Who was the guy back then? We didn't have Peyton Manning yet. I mean, geez, it was Barry Sanders, Walter Payton, trying to have those cards. So hey, what can I do? I missed those, so I can try to get the next best Heisman winner. And then same thing with comic book collecting. And then you'd notice when you go to a show and someone would say, "Oh, that's worth $100. I'll give you 50." And I knew it because I didn't pay 50 for it, and I was okay with it. But then when they started offering you $25, and you said, this isn't as lucrative as it used to be. It's not as much fun. And luckily, I kept a lot of my books and not as many of my cards. I did have some of the cards from that era, but most of the comic books I kept. But we got out of it. I mean, when you're a kid, your taste change, and mine definitely did whenever college started. And then not long after college, you get married and have kids, and none of the time did I ever stop not watch a Marvel movie that came out. I saw Spider-Man when it came in the theaters.
The
I
X-Men
saw
movies.
I saw the X-Men movies. No, definitely saw that. Um, had my kids were young. Well, about 3 years old. My oldest at the time when Iron Man came out, and I said, "They're doing an Iron Man movie. What the heck? What happened to X-Men?" And
Yeah.
not knowing the background of Marvel, and geez, look what it catapulted from that time. I mean, my kids have all the toys of that time frame, the stuffed animals, the some of the toys, and I'm like, and I think about it, and that's what you and I probably did as kids. You had Star Wars, GI Joe, He Man, whatever that thing you were into watching, and that's what my kids did. And I bought it, but I didn't buy the comics during that time.
Yeah. What's funny too, though, about talking about those movies is that, especially with Iron Man, was the first of the MCU, and so since the MCU, it's like people have kind of forgotten like the first Spider-Man, second Spider-Man, first X-Men, and the second X-Men. Those are awesome movies, and to this day, I still think are awesome. Like Spider-Man 2 and X2, I think are still some of the best comic book movies. Like I've watched them both recently again, and they're still like
They
excellent.
stand.
Yeah.
I still like Spider-Man 1. I have not rewatched any of the X-Men movies, but they didn't. And again, I wonder back then if because we weren't into it, what happened to the comics at that time, right?
Yeah, in terms of prices and whatnot.
And now we run into it. Not to jump too far ahead here, but with current movies and how they move the books, and really some of those movies in the early 2000s, take out Spider-Man, the X-Men. I like the Fantastic Four movie.
Which
But
one?
the Chris Evans one.
Ah, okay, the first
Right?
one.
I've seen both those ones. The first ones. I fell asleep in this the most recent one that came out with that group. Maybe it was late. I turned it on late or whatnot. It
Oh
seemed all
no,
right.
the one with like Michael B. Jordan and
Yeah.
dude, that one no, it is straight boring
Is it?
as hell. Like it is bad.
And I haven't got through it and didn't want to as of yet because I like the other ones. They were kind of corny, but it didn't really move. Didn't want to make me, buy Fantastic Four. I like to watch comic book movies, but definitely like when the Silver Surfer showed up in the second one.
Yeah, I will say though, I recently not like several months ago, just like put on that original Fantastic Four we were talking about. Man, it is bad. I mean, like especially when you look at like the effects and like how just like it's shot. It is so crap. You're just like, I could have made this quality of a movie in high school, like level bad. Like it's so bad.
Well, think about there was a lot. The Daredevil came out.
Daredevil was bad. Do you remember that
Ben
original
Affleck.
Hulk with Eric Bana was also bad?
I like that one actually. I like that one.
Oh, see, I like the Ed Norton one, which I guess is part of the MCU.
It is now, but back again, I was trying to understand the continuity of everything. No, and I have an old stock report, and I've read through it before of basically what Marvel did to try to stay alive, selling those properties off.
Yeah,
That's why they made those movies, and really, the continuity was so hard that it wasn't until 2008 that continuity began, and that's what propelled the MCU forward. And I think there was some booms and busts throughout the last from 08 until 2020. I'm not aware of them because I wasn't collecting back then.
What's crazy on that stock report you're talking about though, like, have you read the whole story? It's like when Sony bought Spider-Man for whatever it was, like Marvel offered them like the entire slate for like 25 million, and they were like, "No, we're cool on Spider-Man." And then you think like, right, Disney bought it for what, $2 billion a couple years later, or something like that.
It was. I mean, when Disney bought Star Wars, when Disney bought Marvel, I bought Disney stock at that point just because, hey, what this is going to turn into, and it really didn't amount to much in the stock price, even though those movies were churning out almost $1 billion.
Yeah.
Per movie. I just don't get that part of it, but that started to solidify this pulp culture that we're into now. Is those movies started in 2008 with continuity, but if you go back further, the Spider-Man was good, X-Men was good. Think about the Punisher movie, right?
There was also multiple Punishers. There was one.
Dolph Lundgren.
Well, no, there was that. So Dolph Lundgren was in the 90s. Then there was the Punisher with Thomas. There was two.
With Travolta.
And then there was another Punisher movie.
Yeah, the War Journal one or Warzone.
Yeah, there was with an actor I've never seen before.
Yep. And so you had those cheesy movies. Again, the Travolta, Thomas Jane Punisher they never have done Punisher right.
Yeah.
The Birth and All Punisher series on Netflix was pretty good, but I've never seen it done as I would have expected it from that first miniseries.
Yeah, the Daredevil Netflix series was before the MCU. That was awesome.
Yeah, I'm almost through season 2 or starting season 2 of that. But again, that's like, it's kind of weird that we're dealing with for those 20 years that we weren't collecting. I mean, we watched the movies, we watched the shows, but we never had we didn't want to,
Yeah.
I mean, I got my books out from time to time to look at them, but it didn't make me want to start collecting again. I don't know what propelled me in 2021, the end of it, or 2022, to start buying again. I mean, I watched almost every movie. I critiqued every movie, and I, like Thomas Jane Punisher, why was it not as good as it should have been? Like, that little mini series had so much aggression in it and so much anger from the Punisher, but they never recaptured that. And again, you can't now with Disney probably, but they could have back then and didn't. So, all those things didn't really make the comics jump any of those particular movies until now. So maybe that's a lot of the reason why we're back into it. But, we had a hiatus that didn't really propel us back into it until now. Do you know what event sparked you to?
Yeah. So like it started with me. So I started in 2022 in terms of collecting comic books, like May of 2022 is like exactly when I started. But right before that, so it was like the end of 2021. I remember my brother showed me this. He's like, "Oh, I'm gonna buy this Fantastic Four #5 NFT," and it was on that VV app. I was like, "That's kind of cool. Like, how much does that cost?" And at the time, that was like NFTs were just coming onto the scene, right? And like you heard those stories about like this NFT went for $63 million, and this NFT went for $10,000. So it was like, I heard NFT and he told me he's buying it. I assumed it was like super expensive. I was like, how much is that? And he was like, $6. I was like, oh, I'm down to buy that. Like, that was when kind of VV was first started too. And it was like, at that time, because of bots and things like that, it was really hard to actually get through on a drop and buy some. Anyways, I ended up finding this, and like I would start to buy. There'd be like a one that came out a week, and it was like $6 a week. So what big deal? But that kind of got me like sparking my, because like that Fantastic Four 5, where it's like that's Doctor Doom first appearance, right? I didn't know when I was a kid. I knew Doctor Doom. I didn't know Doctor Doom's first appearance was Fantastic Four #5 because I was in the '60s, right? I, maybe knew some details like that, but and so they would pop out this NFT every week, and it'd be like this key issue because of this and this key issue. I was like, man, I'm really getting back into this. And so I started collecting those, and I have a bunch of them still. Now, granted, the crypto market is completely crashed. They're not worth really anything. But I mean, I was spending $6 to,
Right, sometimes like I bought it.
Yeah. And as I kind of was like learning about, like relearning all this stuff that I read growing up, I remember we took our kids to like one of those play places at the mall by us, just kind of, it was a rainy day. Like, we need to get some energy out. And there was a comic book store on the floor below. So I was like, oh, let me just pop in there. And I went in, and it was all modern stuff. Like, they didn't have anything that we grew up on. And so I just talked to the person. I was like, hey, do you guys have any of this stuff from like the 90s or older? It's like, no, we don't, but there's this other comic book store if you want that stuff that you should go to, called Ancient Comics. And so I was like, okay. And so like later that day we were free, and I was like, I'm gonna just go roll in there and see how it looks. I ended up hanging out there for like an hour and a half talking to the owner. It's like a small shop, right? It's like 600 square feet maybe. And I ended up buying like $25 worth of comics. It was like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like, I found the X-Men 1 was one of the ones I bought, and a couple other issues. And I was like, man, that was a lot of fun. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. And as I did that, I went again the next week, and then I found a different comic book store and I started looking up all the comic book stores around me to see which ones had things that I liked. And I started going like once a week, and it's kind of just like my, it just became kind of my like fun thing to do on my own, to kind of get me away from work and the kids and things like that. And then I started buying a little bit more. And then I remember that first day that I went to that Ancient Comics, Jeff, the owner, was like, he was telling me, he's like, if you want to learn a lot, you can learn a lot on like YouTube. So I started looking up things on YouTube and on Instagram for that matter. And, I found a couple channels that I liked. And then I started watching the live claim sales on A1, which is in Sacramento. I don't know how I got found A1. It just came up, and I started watching a couple of them. It's like, oh man, and they would have these huge keys that they would be dropping, and people would be buying. Man, that is awesome. And that's kind of how it started, right? And at the time, again, like we've both said, like I don't have $3,000 to drop just like that on Hulk 181. So it's like, okay, I'm gonna, I enjoyed this, $10 to $20 comic, like that's totally fine with me. And then I started thinking, I was like, okay, if I have a couple $100 a month, I can buy, let's say, 10 comic books, or I can save that couple hundred this month, save that couple hundred the next month, and I can buy one $500 comic, let's just say. And that was like, I kind of like the idea of having these bigger blue chip books. And so then I started focusing on that. And like, as you learn more, you want more.
Right.
And it just kind of grows and grows. And now it's like I'm super into it. I mean, obviously, we're doing a podcast on it now.
Yeah, it becomes an obsession.
Yeah.
That's how. I mean, it was an obsession for me as a kid because I like to draw and I didn't read the stories. I just like the covers. I like the interior artwork. I mean, I know the storyline, but a lot of my storyline information came from. I have a big Marvel book that has Spider-Man on the cover of it.
Is that the Marvel Encyclopedia?
Yeah, it's like it's more of a. It was the original encyclopedia that came out, and it gave a lot of background on to the early days of Marvel. So a lot of my knowledge came from there back then. So when I got back in again, like I got kids, I was always busy with their sports stuff. I didn't have really any hobbies of my own, and throughout COVID, we didn't really do much until the vaccines came out. Not to get into that kind of stuff, but essentially once everybody was cleared to go out, right? We were driving around to the mall, and we live in an area that doesn't have a ton of stuff, a ton of malls, your Walmarts and your Lowe's. And I was driving past the comic shop that's up by me. I only have one that's about 15, 20 minutes away. The next closest one is 50 miles. So I drive past them, and I said to my kids, they were in the car with me, and I said, let's stop in there. So we stopped in there, and the guy, I remember the guy inside was wearing a mask. He was kind of heavy set guy, and we didn't have masks on. And I said, do you want us to put one on? And he's like, no, you're fine. I said, okay. And he stayed behind the counter with the cover over top of the counter. And we just sort of looked at all the wall books. And I saw I think Batman 423. We saw the first Lucius Fox, and he just was telling me everything about it and seeing the prices. And I was like, geez, oh man, like this stuff really went up. It's crazy. And we BS with this guy for a bit, left the store. And as I'm leaving the store, I saw in the box toy Megatron, the Transformers,
Transformer.
for $1,400. And I said, it makes me mad I ever played with my stuff. I should have just left it in the box. But who the heck still has this stuff in their boxes? I mean, I had at one point early, I had some Star Wars items that I had in the box. Nothing vintage, but 90s stuff. When the episode 1 came out, I had a Boba Fett and some other things in the box. Had it tucked away in a suitcase. My 3-year-old son at the time, this was probably, let's say, 2011, 2012, opened the box up, the suitcase, and cut open every one of those toys out of the box. So I never had anything kept in the box. So it was hard enough as a kid not to play with, let alone my own kids would open that stuff up years ago.
What's funny is you ask who has these toys in the boxes. It's guys like us, but that were then, right? Like,
yeah,
it wasn't kids didn't buy these toys like, I got to put these in the box and keep them unopened. Like it was guys in their 30s or mid 30s or whatever. And they were like in 1998, like, I'm going to buy this Transformers toy and not open it because it's going to be worth something. Like that's what we're doing now, essentially, with comic books.
Yeah, trying to do that, and they spec'd it back then, and I saw it. I was like, wow, I wish I'd have kept that, and that made me go back and start looking at my stuff, and then somehow I got introduced to it on Instagram, seeing those Elite 11, seeing those live sales, and the first book I bought, and I went. There's a store. It's not a comic book store, but the guy sells comics or has comics there, but mostly gaming items. And some years back, I thought, it's time to sell some of my comics. I'm not into it anymore. It's been 20 years. This is like 2018, let's say. And I sold a stack of comics, including my Spider-Man 300, So Amazing Spider-Man 300, 298, 299. First or second appearance of Deadpool and some other X-Force books I sold. And I might have got $200, and I think more along the lines I got $100 for them at the time. And I thought, I was after Christmas, sure, extra $100. These things aren't, they're not really
anything.
Jumping in value. I think it needs to be graded, and I just said to hell with it. I'll get rid of them, some of them. So after that initial meeting or time we spent at that comic show or comic shop, I went back and said, I got to go find those books back from that gamer's store. So a couple days later, or maybe a week later, I went out to that gamer store and asked him if he had them. And he said, I don't still have them, but I have a copy of Amazing Spider-Man 300 if you're interested in it. And that was the first book I bought. I remember taking in some game stuff to trade in on that Amazing Spider-Man in order to pay the least amount as I could. But I think I got $100 for those books in 2018 and bought that damn Amazing Spider-Man back for almost $500.
Yeah.
And that hurt. I was like, oh, at least I got it back. This is the only book I'm going to buy. I got it back. It's back in my collection. Is sort of how I felt. And then I started talking to a buddy who's a bigger collector, collecting mostly Golden Age. And he said, you got to really try to collect graded books, high grade books, and spend the money because they have the biggest return. And I'm looking at a Spider-Man 300, 9.6 or 9.8 for like $6,000. This was March of 2022. So not very long ago. And so end of 2021, I'm in the shop, and then I'm buying back my books a couple months later, a couple weeks later, and then I'm into it now by March, looking to spend $6,000 on a stinking Spider-Man book. Couldn't bring myself to do it, And then a couple of those live sales I saw on Elite, and I saw some, more reasonably priced ASMs 300, and bought that. And then from there, it's the live sales I did, like you mentioned. Didn't buy anything huge, but little keys here and there, and $100 here. And then, what I've been doing as of lately, and that's what we can get into next, is sort of where our collecting has morphed into. Mine was, let me get back all my old books I sold, and then went into, oh, geez, look at that. And it became an obsession. And now I'm, I didn't have a comic book store near me, so I was hitting antique stores. Any antique store. I've hit antique stores from Pennsylvania all the way down to Virginia and over to Long Beach, California, trying to find books. And because I don't have a comic store near me, and I like going to comic stores, but they already have them priced appropriately. I'm trying to make margin because, again, what I'm trying to do is find a book at an antique store that has some margin that was sitting there that I can turn into, let's say, that Fantastic Four, not number 5. We won't get that lucky with something at the antique store. But maybe enough to buy a higher grade ASM 300, right? Find enough of those books of, $5 for this book is worth 100, and trying to turn that into and flipping that into what I really wanted. And that's basically what I wanted, was to get back my collection. And then now it's getting the stuff we didn't buy as kids, right? I didn't have Punisher 1 because Mom wouldn't let me get it. Too violent. I didn't have Omega Men 3. Always wanted Lobo, right? Didn't have that. So that's what it's turned into, getting the books that were important to me then that I couldn't get back then. And I don't know about you, but there's a couple on our list that have become high end that may take some serious planning to get those books.
Yeah. I think it was interesting too. So when I told you I went to that store for the first time, which was again May of 2022. So I have not looked at comic book prices since I was a kid. So I had no idea where things were at. And I went to that store. I'm a small business owner. I got shut down a whole long time while the whole COVID thing happened. And like that crushed like my business. And so I went to this comic book store. I'm like, oh, people come here. Therefore, they probably were closed down. And I was talking to Jeff, the owner, and I was like, man, has the last 2 years been really tough for you being closed? And he's like, man, comic books boomed during COVID like no other. He's like, I've never made so much money selling comics. He's like, I'll probably be able to retire a few years earlier than I expected because of this. He's like,
a couple Superman, Death of Superman.
I was like, really? I was like, he's like, yeah. He's like, with people stuck at home, they had to find things to do, and comics was one of those outlets, I guess. And, I was like, I guess that makes sense. And then it's kind of funny now, like, then I went to my first show and I went to another show, and its prices were still pretty high. And now it's like, it's kind of funny, like, it's not even a year later. And like, I mean, I would say prices have dropped on some of the bigger stuff by like 40, 50%, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And it seems like from what we learned, right? Like, this is now where we're starting to get to would have been the natural trajectory had there not been the pandemic.
Yep.
Which is good for us because, like we talked about, like, we have $6,000 drop on ASM 300. So prices coming down is only better for us and for, I'm sure, most people.
And I think for you and I, the fact that we got in late 2021, early 2022, and not really jumped into it, I mean, $500 on the ASM 300 was, something I just thought I had to do, but I wasn't fully engulfed into it then. And had we been a year prior, we might have been paying way higher for some books. I'm sure I paid high for some books. But again, it comes down to, you want them for your personal collection. We're not dealers. We're personal collectors trying to find, the books we want. And again, I think we're lucky that we got into it when we did, because we can benefit from some of this pricing. And hopefully this does turn around. I start to think about the early 2000s and those movies that came out, and they didn't propel the industry forward. And now that we're in phase 4, at the end of phase 4, that wasn't that great. Will phase 5 and 6 help propel these books higher? Or are we going to sit on these for 20 years?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the books that speaking of kind of where our tastes have evolved, the books that I want to collect now are these bigger blue chip keys. And while as you and I have talked about before, like, comic books is a hobby for me. Like, we have our own investments and portfolios and things like that. I do comic books purely for the enjoyment aspect. That being said, the books that I am interested are the books that, if you want a real return on them, you do need to hold them for 10, 20 long term, right? I'm not looking to get into this kind of flip game kind of with the ones that I want to keep, right? Like, if I see a book that's like, oh man, it's a great price on that, I could use that to stair step to the book I want, then I will do that. But otherwise, the books I want to keep are going to be for that long term. And it's kind of funny, as short-lived as this hobby has been so far for me, it's like I already think like this is going to be really cool to get one of my kids into, and I can pass the collection down to them and kind of thing like that.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it as an investment side of things. So I look at it a little different than you do, but I have books that I want to keep for my personal collection. And I have a box still full of all the books and again, the McFarlane's on my wall. Those have all been kept from the 90s, from when I collected. So what I did was I'm doing the same thing now that I did back then. I tried to find a book that was hot, flip it to get money to buy what I really wanted. And I look at it that way, that if I'm buying, again, if we're going to try to do a podcast here coming up called, The Hunt for 181, right? But if I'm going to sink $3,000 on that book, and that's a low grade.
Yeah.
Like, what enjoyment do I get out of having that book versus 10 other $300 books? And when you look at something that's a key, that means something to you, it makes you feel good, right? So so will that I go back and forth with something like that. Like, that's how my mind sort of wired with the investment side of it, is this good use of capital? Even though I find enjoyment from it, it's definitely a hobby for me. And it was back then, it's not my business. It's just something I do for fun. But again, we could just drop money after money on this stuff of our, not go.
But I think one way you can look at it is like, look at your background right now. You've got all those comic books on the wall and things like that. So I personally don't have a comic book space, but I eventually hope to have one. And when we talk about like enjoying them, that's how you enjoy them, right? You're putting them up on your wall. You like to look at them. You like looking at the art, right? If you have dozens of small keys, you can't plaster your entire wall with them, right?
Yeah.
But you could put that one Hulk 181 up there, and you're going to be damn happy every time you see that.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas the other books, the smaller ones, they're going to sit in a box. And once you got them, what are they going to do? They're just going to sit in that box.
Yeah. Yeah. Right? I listen to some podcasts and YouTube, and I see guys like, oh, I think I have that one. I got to check my boxes for that. It's like, well, I don't want these in the dark, right? I want them
Yeah.
all displayed, and I'm running out of room to display them because I have a lot of little keys that I, have some significance to a character I like. So I bought the key, the little, like Wolverine, Deadpool, or Wolverine '88 with Deadpool on it. I mean, it was that $100 book, and it's nice to display, but there'll be another one, right? There's only one Hulk 181, one ASM 129, one superhero, Marvel superhero 20 with Doom on the cover. So that's probably a good point. That
Yeah.
displaying these items, and again, but you know, I look at it a couple different ways, and I say, is that a good return or a good use of your money? And then you want to give them to your kids. I mean, my kids are somewhat older. They think it's cool, but they don't really want to collect with me, and maybe they will someday. Maybe they'll change their mind, but I don't want to be the old guy at the show trying to get rid of my collection and
Yeah.
trying to get some of my money back that I have all this stuff here that you sunk in thousands
Yeah.
and you got enjoyment and now you're at a show and you're like, all right, I'll take $100 for that.
Yeah.
And I feel bad for some of those guys I see at shows because they're trying to get out of it. And it's hard to unload this stuff. I mean, you and I, our Instagram, we do YouTube and podcasts. And the YouTube and podcasts are normally people who are successful at selling books for the most part, right? Or collecting, we'll call it. I mean, if you got money, you can be successful collecting. Just buy what you want, right?
Yeah.
But if you like, I don't even want to bring up the name, but you get a couple of these influencers who are good at flipping books or whatnot, and they get some benefit out of it. But you go to a show and you see these same guys who they just can't unload stuff. And I don't,
Yeah.
I just think there's a dichotomy between the successful influencer YouTube guy or gal who's got a nice show, a nice following, and then you got the other guy who's at the show every week, traveling from place to place, and he just can't get rid of these books,
Yeah.
right? Because it died off for him. The love was gone, and he just wants rid of them. And I don't want to turn into that guy. I think that's obviously we had a thing for this. That's why we came back into it, and I hope it lasts. And that either we can, I'm not saying it's going to be by my beach house. All these comics would be nice, but some of them I don't want to get rid of. But I don't want to be that guy in 20 years or 30 years at a show trying to, sitting there like a bump on a log trying to get rid of my books.
Yeah. No, I think like if let's just say like my kids don't get into it, I think, and it down the line I'm an old guy and be like, well, I don't need these anymore because I think in that situation I would just sell to like a dealer at like how they buy collections 40% of whatever, that way they can make money off them and then go on a nice vacation. And well, really think, but again, my hope is that I can get one of my kids into it, pass on to them as kind of like a legacy kind of thing.
Yeah.
But who knows?
That'd
What
be nice.
I think what for you? What are you listening to? What are you watching to learn? Where do you shop now for these? Like, how's that process gone? Like, go through all that for yourself.
I started with the antique stores and still do that because there's nothing close to me comic shop wise. And the guy who owns the shop closest to me, I don't really get along with him anymore. And so, I'm sure I can go back in there, but I'm not going to go to his establishment. And the place in 60 miles away, again, they got some nice books there, but they got them priced right. So I enjoy the hunt of finding a book. I still have it in my head that I will find a Hulk 181 in some antique store someday, sometime, or some flea market.
Yeah.
The coolest book I found at an antique store or at a flea market was, I'm not going to say it's the coolest one, but probably one you wouldn't see very often, is Bone 1, which was the second printing. It's a comic from 1991 with, I think it's Greg Smith who drew it, and then Bone 2, first printing. Those books themselves are, first printing of Bone 1 is a $6,000 book. Second printing is a couple $100, and same with Bone 2, but they were just sitting in some random antique store. And so you start finding something like that, and you say, "Oh, there's got to be Fantastic Four 1, ASM 1, Hulk 181, or ASM 129."
There was a guy that I follow on Instagram this week that said, "I found this pile of books at an estate sale, and there was X-Men 1 in there, and that was the biggest book. There was several." I saw another guy I follow. He found like an ASM 300 for $5 at a garage sale. So there's definitely obviously those fines are like 1 in 1,000, right? But I mean, you keep going.
Yeah,
your chances are only going to get better. I'm not saying it's going to happen. They're only going to get better the more you do that.
Right, and I watch Mint Hunter Comics. He does a lot of the flea market, antique store type stuff. He's buying collections now. I just saw a most recent one where he bought a pretty sizable collection. I like watching Lunch Money Comics because he's kind of like us, where he got out of it for a while and got back in recently, and he hits up all the antique store and flea markets, and he has a nice wall behind him of all his books he found. So he's got a nice story and a nice way he does his podcast or his YouTube videos. And then there's, Comic Tom, there's Lords of the Long Box I listen to get the spec information. Spec Tales is another good show. But when I'm either working out or when I'm walking my dog, I'm listening to those podcasts. When I got downtime at home, I like to watch Mint Hunter and Lunch Money Comics. I like to watch them go through flea markets and see what they find, because that's like me going to a flea market. It's like if I can't go tonight, I can watch them go through there and see what they find, and I find that just enjoy at times. So it's that's about what I'm still hitting the antique stores and comic shows. I think we're done for the year, but I'll probably continue to do that and see what I can find.
Nice. Yeah, I like so when I first, and I still watch, like the first guy I kind of, and I've watched most of those guys, Mint Hunter and all these guys, the ones that I still consistently watch, and I found him very early on was Swaggle Haas.
Oh yeah.
And I've learned a ton from him. And then later on, my favorite guy is Lawrence from Mighty Comics, and he's just kind of watching how he collects has really influenced how my tastes have become. Those are the two I watch the most consistently. I started actually watching Lunch Money just on your recommendation. I enjoy that guy. And there's a few other guys I watch here and there. Reggie Collects, I guess, is another one I watch. And it's great. I mean, you just learn a lot just by watching these guys. And the more you learn, the better you get at, hunting and collecting. Because like when I first started collecting, like I had a couple, there are a couple stores by me where I could bounce around to. And then I would do the eBay thing. And then like after I started doing a lot on eBay, and then like I remember I've got probably like 3 or 4 books delivered to me on eBay by some schmuck that like just put it in like a padded envelope with like no rigidity, and it's just like, what the hell is this? Like
it wasn't graded, it was just a raw book in there.
Yeah, and like plus you got the eBay fees, and I was just like, man, this gets expensive. And then like I just started following more people on Instagram, and I would tell anybody right now the best place to buy. Obviously, you may need to go to an auction house for your AF-15 and your Hulk 1. And obviously, but those do also pop on Instagram. But, like, otherwise, like, I would say buy on Instagram, man. Like, you can talk to the dealers. You can negotiate some deals with them. And just, like, becoming friends with them, it's easier to get better deals. I haven't, once it kind of got to September, I was like, I've kind of gotten way into this. I got to kind of cool it down. Especially when it was coming to the holiday season and things like that, and so I've been trading a lot, especially like as I have talked to you about.
You've been killing it on the trade.
Yeah, no, I've done super well. But like I had like 2 boxes of like $10 and $20 comics, right? And I want bigger ones now, and so I found especially one guy specifically where he was like, he's a guy that sells, and he's like, with the economy how it is, it's like it's easier for me to sell 10 $50 books than it is for me to sell one $500 book. So we've been doing these bundle deals where it's like I'll send him a package of 25 books, and then I got Iron Man 1, right? I got Fantastic 452. I've gotten I just traded this week. I got Giant Size X-Men 1. It should be coming today or tomorrow. So on and so forth. And so like I've taken my collection, which is was not huge to begin with, but I mean, it was 2 boxes, and and I've got now like only one of those boxes is like a third full, and then I've got a box of small box of graded books now, and I enjoy this kind of hunting a lot more. So instead of now buying 10 to 20 books a month, it's like a book every couple months.
So you're hunting on Instagram to find the person that can work the trade.
Yeah.
Right.
Right now, like, and then after we get through the holidays and things like that, I'll start, just buying as well. But I mean, like, again, like my budget is still at best going to be a couple $100 a month, so it's like I'll kind of have to like aggregate that and then buy what I like or buy what I want. And so, as I've showed you, you probably don't need to do this, but like I made a list of, I think there's 75.
Yeah, you sent me that list of books you want.
Yeah, and it's like there's Silver Age and Bronze Age, like blue chip books. Now those lists there's not AF-15, there's not X-Men 1, there's not Tales of Suspense 39. I am kind of the mindset that like, and plus like there's nothing Golden Age on there. There's no Batman 1s, there's no Tech 27s or Action 1s, right? Because I'm kind of the mindset like, those books are so far out.
That's a lottery list.
Yeah, that's lottery. Exactly.
You win the lottery, you buy them.
The only chance I could probably see myself getting those is finding them at the garage sale and things like that. Now, granted, I don't have antique stores. I mean, maybe I do. I just haven't had the time to research and look and go hunt. And I rarely see garage sales, and I have popped into a few that I have seen. I've never seen comic books at a garage sale, even though I know that does happen because I've seen guys say that. But I mean, if I see one, I'm definitely going to stop by. And maybe one day I find one of those there. That in my prop, because the other thing too is like, could I trade like Iron Man 1, Fantastic Four 52, and several of these other blue chips, but on the smaller side? Could I trade a bunch of them and get an X-Men 1? Potentially, but I don't know if I want to do that, right? Because I really like Fantastic Four 52. I really like Iron Man 1, and it wasn't easy to get those.
Yeah.
And so, now I'll happily trade, what is it like? I had just traded part of my trade for the GSX one, right? I traded a Captain America Annual 8, which is the first Captain America versus Wolverine battle, which is an awesome book. But it's worth like $25. So I'm like, I'll gladly put that in the deal for GSX one and things like that.
Well, that's the thing too, is like when I go to the antique store, I find a book I didn't really care to want, but I see margin to maybe get that book you're talking about, the Captain America Annual 8, because that's a cool book, right? But again, is it a PC book? Yes, but that's where I get to this. At some point, maybe you grow out of favor of them. You wanted it for a bit, now you want something bigger. It's not a huge key, just a cool book, classic cover. And that's where I think you and I, when we look at books, it's classic cover or key, and we're using Key Collector. That's one of the places I check, and eBay for prices. But that's for another day. Here, is to go into how we price these things out, because I think that's the biggest issue now, is trying to price these things out. But trying to find these keys, and for myself, I may not find that Captain America 8. But I might find something else that's worth something to buy into it. And I keep, and I got a like for it. And, if I did have an opportunity to send out a bunch of books for something bigger, I probably would. But a lot of these I'm just going to keep. And the stuff that I find at antique stores that aren't up my alley are just purely flip or spec books to get what you're talking about somehow, right? I've not been able to work a deal with a bunch of books through Instagram. I've done pretty well at comic shows. But the most recent show I went to, they were really offering a lot less than what I had hoped. So I did come away with a pretty good key that I wanted. But again, there's so much out there. It's like, you showed me the Captain America 8. I'm like, oh, that's a cool book. I'm going to find that. Then the Captain America, what is it, 245? What one has the Hulk punching the I think it's 230 actually. Hulk punching the shield on that cover. Captain America.
I don't know. The Captain America book I always think of with the Hulk. Is it 110? It's like an old Jim Steranko cover where he's like, there's Cap and Bucky on the cover, and the Hulk like busted through a wall. Like, I love that book.
Oh, nice. I don't know that one. The one I'm talking about is one where you see Cap's face and he's holding the shield up, and all you see is the Hulk's.
Oh, yeah. I don't know what number it is, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
I think it's 230. Then I think 240 has the Punisher on it. So those are like small little keys, and there's nothing about the book except those characters are in them. But for me, those are cool to have as something you don't see every day, and I don't find them at antique stores.
Yeah.
I found other crap at antique stores that I can turn into getting those books. But once I have them, I'm going to probably keep those. But then again, it's going to come into a problem of how much do we keep?
Yeah.
You want a couple short boxes full of graded books. That's much easier to retain and keep on your walls or whatnot than boxes and boxes and boxes.
Yeah, I think that the question I started to think about was like, if I am willing to grade, whether or not, I mean, let's just say if I get a book, we'll just talk about raw books here, but like if I'm willing to go through the effort to get a book graded, then that's what I think is worth keeping in the PC. If not, then it's tradable or expendable or however you want to look at it.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think it's the time frame we're in now is that it's a buyer's market. It's not a seller's market. I was buying stuff pretty easily early in the year. I had 2 copies of Marvel Team Up 141. I couldn't get rid of that second one to save my life. I couldn't even trade it. Right. But I could have bought 10 more of them because there's 100 people selling them.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe at some point when it becomes a seller's market again, maybe you can easily get rid of those keys you're talking about. You're doing a pretty good job with it now on the trades, but maybe, we'll see a time where we can actually flip them the other way. Now it's easy to buy because you get good prices, but I'm just not seeing it on the other end of it of what I can sell or what I can trade for.
Yeah.
But then again, I think my list of what I will trade, what I will get rid of trade wise is kind of smaller than yours because I want to keep some of the ones I got. But I think one last thing maybe we can talk about here is as we finish things up is our short-term goals that we have. I think that's a good idea as we go into 2023. We've talked a little bit about where the market's been, where we might think it might go. Tell me, what are you thinking you're going to do in next year? I mean, you mentioned some of the, once New Year, we're going to start buying again, but what targets do you have? And
yeah, I mean, obviously, like we talked about, our next episode is going to be called The Hunt for 181. And that's obviously Hulk 181, the first Wolverine. So that one's out there. Will it be feasible in 2023? I don't know. I mean, again, like we said, I'm not a guy that can drop $3,000 tomorrow.
But if you had 3,000, let's just say that, would you buy that? You buy that book without even thinking about it?
If I had 3,000 that was expendable money, yes, that would be the book I would buy. Not because I think it's the best investment, and because I don't. I think there's probably better investment books you can buy at $3,000. But my 3 favorite characters are Silver Surfer, Wolverine, and Batman. And so I'm not ever going to be able to get a Tech 27. Fantastic Four 48 is another book that I was just going to mention, but I'll say so. And then Wolverine. So it's like Wolverine or Hulk 181 is a book I want for personal reasons, not because it's like the best investment book. I want it because Wolverine. I love Wolverine, and also I'll also add, in my opinion, Hulk 181 is the best cover out there. It does not get better than that.
Okay.
And so like that kind of adds to it. So obviously Hulk 181 is always out there, but like we talked about, that's gonna be a whole other episode. We're gonna talk about like how do we strategize to get there? Because I don't have $3,000 to spend. And then 2 would be FF48 for Silver Surfer. I've got 49. I've got 50. I'm hoping I can still make one last trade and maybe potentially get the FF48. That may be happening, hopefully. And then ASM 129 would be the third book I would say that I will prioritize in 2023. And that's what I think, like with my couple $100 a month aggregating, is one I can get. Because like you see those, like the prices for those is going down. And I think they'll go back up once like the Daredevil Born Again series starts popping up trailers, and you probably get a hint at Punisher. But I think right now and in the next few months will be a good time to get that. So those would be the 3. Those are the 3 high priority books I want to go after. From there, obviously, I always will keep an eye out for all the other books on my list of 75 that we talked about that I can find at good deals.
Yeah. So whenever you go to the comic store, you take this list out like this.
Well, it's on my phone,
like
right? It's on my notes thing for yeah.
But yeah, I have like a running list in my head, and that's the thing. Like, I I went to a show this weekend or last weekend, and I wanted to try to trade for that Hulk 181. I had money on me to buy it, at least some part of it, and I just couldn't get enough on trade to make it worth it. And I hate going all the way to a show and not coming back with something decent. So I think I made a decent trade and got some cash for some other stuff. But it just, you go into it, and I've gone to the last couple shows with intentions of buying certain books, and sometimes they're just unreachable. So you got to find that one dealer that you've been able to do and just work them, or a couple guys, because a show, I've had luck trading things and getting some things, but usually the ones that are top on my list, I don't, they're just overpriced there.
Yeah, I feel like shows are, for those books you're talking about, like, I think shows are always like, they're pretty high priced.
And they're not willing to trade for him. The one guy he had, had like, I think ASM 129 was raw. He wanted 2,000 for it and wouldn't trade for it.
And it's like you could buy a graded 129 for less than $2,000.
Right. But if you got margin in your books, and you might be able to give them like books you don't care about, and you get it, right? Totally. At least you got it there. But so I look at it that way. But if I didn't, I'm not going to give them $2,000 for that, right? Because it's like you're overpriced, because I can get it, like you just said, graded. But it's just, I met a guy this weekend who bought a collection that I saw on Facebook and was going to put an offer on, but I wasn't willing to spend 10 or 15,000 on a collection. I don't need 41,000 books, just to the opportunity to get a Hulk 181. And he bought the collection, and I think it was 12 long boxes. 12. Yeah. So I figured like $12,000 was a good price for that. He said, couple people came in at 12. He offered the guy 30 and won it. The offer. $30,000. That's why he wasn't buying any of my books, because he had just spent $30,000 on 12 long boxes. He got a GSX1 out of it, 2 Hulk 181s, and a bunch of keys that he said just selling the GSX1 and the Hulk, one of the Hulks, would pay for half the collection. The rest he'd get back over time. And I thought, do I want to wait on $15,000 to come back to me through these various trades and sales?
Yeah, and not to mention, I mean, I think the other thing you have to take into account with that, are you someone that wants 12 long boxes? And if you are, that's great. Like, I don't got the room for it at my house. Like, I want to have comics on the wall. I don't need 12 long. Like, it's all about what you want, right? Like, some people are like, I want to collect ASM 1 to 300, and that's awesome. If you could do it, that's a challenge. That's awesome. But you all got to know what you want. So it's like, when I think about buying a collection, it's like, do I want to spend that much money for the hope of a 181? But then I also have to deal with 40,000 other books.
Yeah. That's what this guy had to do. And are they in good shape? And all that, it comes down to trying to, like, again, find those books and what, eventually maybe they'll come down, like you were saying, because these dealers are, seeing what the market's doing. But I just couldn't bring myself to, and I couldn't bring myself to doing that kind of a number, to have that many books just to worry about. Because if you're spending that kind of money, I want it graded.
Yeah.
I don't want any ands, ifs, or buts about it.
Yeah, exactly. You want to know what you have. Exactly.
Right. I'll buy a raw one for $1,000 maybe, or 1,500, and say, oh, it's probably a 3, but this guy wants to get rid of it. But I'm not spending. The one guy wanted $2,500 for a one missing a page on that 181. I don't want it to come back restored. That's a kiss of death for any book. So, but that's some stuff we learned throughout the time here the last year of restored purple and green labels. So that seems to be what we're running into, is those are the easiest ones to get, because people want to unload them because they don't want that problem. It's like having a car that has a sound in the engine or whatnot. Someone just wants to get rid of it.
Yeah.
And buy something else.
I will add, though, like, since we were talking about where to buy, like, one other thing I like about Instagram, like, if you go to a store, right, like I say, I have my list of 75, right? They may have, any given store may have 3 or 4 of those, if at best, right?
Oh, the 75?
Of the 75, let's just say, right? Whereas, like, Instagram, if you follow multiple dealers, you can find a lot of those, almost still see them every week. So it just opens up the world of where you can buy. And then 2, a lot of the guys there, I find, are not like brick and mortar store dealers as well. So they don't have to deal with like overhead costs and things like that. And so their margin doesn't need to be as large. And they're much more apt to make good deals and things like that. So just something I think that works well. So.
Yeah, I agree. It's it's been an interesting year. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's super fun. And like, I mean, hell, you and I met just via Instagram. So like,
yeah, and that's because your name back in the game. I was like, this guy's the same as me, getting back into it, and you know how the collections have grown, and you know I think you're going to be my what do you call it, my trade guy to try to work trades out if you can, because you've been able to do, because there are again some books I have on my short term list, same one as you. Maybe we'll just buy one Hulk 81 together and just save the money and, you know, ship it back and forth.
We'll mail it back and forth across the country. It'll be like the Stanley Cup, right? We just get to hold it for a little bit.
Yep. But maybe I think we'll both get it this year. I think there'll be a chance. I'm hopeful of that. But yeah, I'm probably on the same boat with a couple. The Hulk 181 is on my list. And again, I see new books all the time I'd like to buy. So I can't really say I got a huge list, but there are definitely some cool books I see through Instagram that show up and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that book and I want to have that. And I think I want to be in that old guy that has too many books that he's got to get rid of.
Yeah.
I'll have some keys I want to keep on the wall, but there's going to be like that Power Pack 10 that I bought as a kid. You know, I'm going to keep that one for whatever nostalgia reason. But yeah, it's all what you like. It's been a hobby. It's been fun. And, you know, I think, you know, I've want to do a podcast and talk about stuff like this, and I hope we can do another one again. Like we said, next one will be the Hulk 181, and I hope we can continue to grow them from there. And you know, those of you that are listening, you can find me at 1977 Nerd Alert. Rohan, you have your
I'm at Back in the Game Comics on Instagram. You can check out the stuff I got. I will add on my list of 75. Right, I just talked about 3 books I want for 2023. That's kind of the rate of which I'm going. So when I say that list, that is like a 15 to 20 year list
long-term
what
list.
I want to work at. That's not something I expect to get in the next 2 years. That is a long-term list.
Right. Yep. No, I remember you said that, and that's like just plotting it out to get to that point.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good planning.
And what's good about that, right, with that list is yes, it can grow, but like since I'm not into modern books, so it's not like that list is going to really expand. Like the stuff I want is already known entities.
Right.
Right.
It's not going to grow from 75 to 80 to 85 because
because a new Spider-Man came out or whatever. It's like I don't collect modern.
You don't want the M&M Spider-Man.
No. I do think it's a super cool cover, but definitely not for me.
All right. Yeah, if I came across it, I might get it, but I'm not spending that kind of money on it. Again, where would you rather put your money? And that's into that towards a Hulk 181 or some other key besides a book like that.
Yeah, I mean, but like that's a perfect example. Like you may find that book, you can find it for like $10, $20, and you may be able to sell it for $60. So
yeah, and that's trying to get the margin to get those next bigger books, but slow going. But I mean, again, you can. It's I think the time of year we're in is where stuff like this slows down for us and the dealers because no one's buying anything till Christmas, and maybe there'll be a big gluttony of money from people in January, and we can unload some stuff or do some decent trades to start that hunt for 181 and get it before July.
Tuned. Hopefully next week we'll do the Hunt for 181 episode. That'll be our episode 2.
Yep. And anyone have any questions or want to message us, you got our Instagram pages. Feel free to hit us up. Love to hear from anybody.
Yeah, I'm always down to talk comics. It's super fun. I mean, that's how JP and I became friends. So I'm all about it.
Yep, definitely. So we'll sign off. That's enough said, as Stan Lee would say. It's been fun, and we look forward to our next cast. And hope everyone has a great day.
All right. Later.
Peace.